Hello, Tom.
Oh, hey,
Welcome to the Thunderdome.
thank you. The Thunderdome. Hey, I'm so sorry about being late.
No,
There was
you're
a guy
fine.
fixing the air conditioner,
It's all good.
and yeah. So you need to go to the podcast soon.
I'm a little flexible. Just hit me up and we'll see where the
Okay.
conversation goes. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it.
hmm
So yeah, we chatted. I don't know, a couple of years ago or a year ago or something
hmm
about neuroscience and ethics.
hmm
I think uh, I think I got to admit that you don't have any true friends. I don't know if that's still true, but uh,
Damn.
you sort of, I think, ended up classifying yourself as like an instrumental, like having friends that are very instrumental, or
Sure.
sort of something like that, or transactional, I think was the word you used.
Okay.
But anyway, I followed your YouTube channel still, and I noticed earlier this year you seemed to say that you're no longer a physicalist. Is that in terms of theory of mind, meaning that you think that there's more than just the physical in in thinking about our minds? Do you still think that?
Maybe. I guess the issue that I've kind of run into right now is the more that I think about it, there seems to exist some substance in the universe that I absolutely believe exists, but I have absolutely no organ that I can use to perceive the existence of this thing. So other
Mm.
minds are things that I'm pretty sure exist. I act in a way that I believe they exist, and I truly do believe they exist. I believe my own mind exists, but I have absolutely no way whatsoever of perceiving another person's mind.
Right, yeah. Um, have you ever heard of a guy called Galen Strawson, or maybe like who else?
Probably not. Is this panpsychism
Okay.
or whatever? That's what a lot of people throw at me, but
Well, yeah, they. So yeah, there's something called real monism or real physicalism,
okay.
um, which is sort of put forward by people like things. Uh, Let me just check. I think I have it in the email that I sent to you.
hmm
Let me just check. Yeah, Galen Strawson was the one I was thinking of. And anyway, he basically posits that yeah, there are these things like other minds that I just have to accept on face value, or even he would even say that even experiential sort of experience in general is something that like qualia, if you believe in qualia,
hmm
can't be reduced completely to the physical. And in that sense, well, no, he says they can be sort of that they are obviously physical. He thinks, but he also thinks that um, they they are real. Yeah, they are sort of. It's kind of a weird statement, but he's saying that like those epiphenomenological kind of um, phenomenological experience or other minds totally exist in the strongest possible way that even uh, Cartesian dualists think, but they are ultimately physical, and that a real physicalist accepts that those things are real, but they just exist on different levels, on different sort of planes.
Sure, but at
Um,
that point, I feel like you've bastardized and stretched physical to mean so much that literally any new phenomenon that you introduce to will necessarily become physical, which makes physical a vacuous thing. That's what it feels like, right?
mm, well, maybe. I mean, but are you suggesting then that there is some other substance in the universe other than physical?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Uh,
I guess before my
so
understanding was that as a materialist or physicalist, I would say
yeah.
that all things exist as matter and all things are perceivable by humans. That anything that
Well,
can't be perceived is necessarily disregarded or discarded.
okay. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? So you can have sort of an epistemology
hmm
of physicalism and a metaphysics of physicalism. So that is to say that you can say, for example, you can have the metaphysical belief that fundamentally these other minds and the experiences that you have in all of their richness
hmm
exist in a very abstract way, but you don't have the metaphysical sorry the epistemological tools or even sense organs, as you said,
hmm
to investigate that. um, and so the yeah, basically I think that's kind of the proposition by people like Strawson, who would say that you can take the metaphysical position,
hmm
which is perhaps more likely to be true, um, and that is that the brain is is where the seat of consciousness is, but then still accept epistemologically that you don't know how to investigate that, or you might even never be able to investigate that because of the problem of other minds.
Yeah, sure. I don't really care so much what to call it or whatever, but basically it's just the idea is that it seems that there exists some types of materials that we are not able to investigate, which is interesting to me because I don't think I would have previously accepted that.
So you think, but are they materials or are they just like phenomena?
I don't know. I don't really know if I care to distinguish between the two, or I don't know what the implications would be. Like, I don't know if
Okay.
it's meaningfully different to say, oh, well, they're either immaterial or they're just some material that I can't investigate. Because I guess previously I would have thought, like, material that I can never investigate is necessarily immaterial. So I don't know.
I see. But yeah, or I suppose you could just, yeah, I think if you mean sort of practically from epistemological point, you treat them about the same, whether or not they're immaterial or just something that you can't investigate directly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or indirectly,
But
yeah.
or indirectly. I guess though that there is the implication that if it's based on some immaterial thing, some non-physical thing, then you're committed to saying that there's an interaction between whatever that thing is and physical things that might be beyond just the mental realm, but you could think of other sort of religious beliefs that might introduce interactions between that realm and the physical realm.
Sure. I'd prefer to say, like, immaterial beliefs, but yeah, religious would definitely be one of those immaterial things, right?
Yeah. But you're not religious, right? So don't you prefer to say that everything is physical?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I have a preference on the matter. I mean, if God was real, I would probably prefer that. That seems like a much more preferable world than the cold, absurdist
really?
or nihilist. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you haven't heard of like anti what is it called? Like sort of very anti-Judeo-Christian kind of views of like say Christopher Hitchens or something like that.
Probably. I mean, I've heard all the. I used to be a really edgy atheist growing up, so
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard all the. If God is what is it? If God is omniscient and all powerful, then whence does come the evil or whatever? Basically, right? Yeah. If God is all knowing but lacks the power, why call him God? If God has the power but whatever, then he's evil, and if whatever, if he lacks evil, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I know all the sayings or whatever. But I mean, the idea that the universe is some orderly, but I was also a Catholic for 16 years, so I know like all the bullshit ways around it, right? Like all human suffering on the planet that seems to be, a result of God's negligence is in actuality a result of human negligence, that humans in the Garden of Eden turned their back on the perfection of God. Therefore, all suffering that exists on the planet is the result of, like basically human evil, much the same as though a shadow is the absence of light. Human suffering is the absence of God. It's not God's fault that kids suffer and starve. It's humans' fault, and that's our burden to carry it, blah, blah, blah. Like, I mean, like there are answers to it, but
not very satisfactory, at least to me. But
well, it's not very satisfactory to say that there's no reason for us to exist in the universe, and at the moment of death we exit this universe either. I think that's incredibly unsatisfying, though.
Well, I suppose I mean kind of scientifically unsatisfactory or epistemologically unsatisfactory, whereas you might mean psychologically satisfactory or unsatisfactory. I personally have no psychological preference, I guess, in terms of satisfactory or non-satisfactory in general for there being an afterlife, because there are many different versions, right? There are some where if I've ever sinned, then maybe I go to hell, but then there are some that I have to perpetually praise God in white robes sitting on clouds. So I don't really know. It depends on which afterlife it is.
Sure.
But you would prefer there to be an afterlife no matter what, then?
I think generally. Although that's kind of like impossible for me to really say. Like, I would say that I prefer existing as opposed to not existing, but I can't really state a preference about how I would feel while not existing, because stating a preference presupposes you having an experience. So trying to imagine how you would feel while not having an experience is like literally contradictory. So I don't know.
Yeah. It's a bit like being scared of before you were born,
Sure, yeah, or being scared of like dying in your sleep, like while you're asleep. Like you can't really state a preference while you're not having an experience. Like it's not possible.
Yeah, exactly. Although there are so-called future-orientated preferences, right? Like I can have a preference that tomorrow I don't get hit by a car, and I have that preference at this moment, and that might or might not be satisfied by future events, but we sort of apply that sort of future-orientated preferencing towards animal ethics sometimes. When thinking about the preferences for living or not living.
Possibly, yeah. Although I would still argue that all of those preferences are very present, that none of them are future preferences. It's just a present preference that is trying to take into account how you'll feel in the future, right? But
Yeah, but then, I mean,
like if I'm
but I
stating a
mean,
future preference, what I'm trying to guess at is what my preference will be in the future. So when I arrive at that moment in time, ideally the preference that I stated in the past that was a future preference lines up with my current preference in the future. But I couldn't state a future preference for if I'm currently enduring a mode of existence where I can have no preference. So for instance, I couldn't say that when I'm in a coma, I prefer to be in a purple room 10 days from now. And then when I'm in a coma 10 days from now, well, do I truly have a preference for the color of the room I'm in? Well, I don't know. I don't believe that.
well, I guess, yeah, I suppose you can think about preferences either as experiential or as some kind of moral, having some sort of external moral status about the person's wishes. It's like when, like, people have wishes about what
Mm-hmm.
happens to their stuff when they die, or
Yeah,
how
but I
they'll be
believe that
buried.
I think that those wishes are, I think we use like phraseology or terminology to make it sound as though we're moving those wishes through time. But the reality is that
Mm,
it's always like present stated. Like I have things that I hope happens to my money when I die,
mm,
but once I'm
mm.
dead, I no longer have any of those wishes because I don't exist. I can't express a preference at that point, or I can't have one, right?
So then, you, while someone is sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
they have no preference to continue living, right?
Yeah.
So on a preference, account of utility or some kind of preference ethics, then you would say that it's okay to kill them while they're sleeping because they have no preference to live.
The only reason I would argue against this is because I think that has like waking world implications. But on an absolute level, yeah, I mean, I don't think so, right? If somebody were to be instantaneously killed in their sleep, it's not like they'd know one way or another, right?
But isn't this like, I mean, isn't this going to be problematic? Like you're going to say like date raping is okay, like date drug raping,
Well,
because they're not going to remember it.
no, because because that stuff usually has implications that carry over into your waking world, right?
Could you give an example?
Well, sure. Once you're raped, when you wake up, other people are generally made aware of your rape, which has social stigma. Your body sometimes will have suffered trauma, which carries like physical stigma. And then your personal knowledge of what had happened to you while you were asleep will carry some sort of psychological trauma.
Okay, but assume that, we had some kind of
Yeah, like
really.
I'll do it and like I'll bite the bullet on it. It's gonna sound really
Yeah.
fucked up, but if we were to construct the perfect hypothetical where a person could
Yeah.
be knocked out, 100% unconscious for one day, and then they were raped
Mm.
during that day, and then they were returned, but they weren't like injured or they had no bodily evidence of it, and nobody else knew about it. Yeah, it's hard to say that like whether right or wrong has been committed there without needing some sort
Okay.
of like external, objective, moral, whatever foundation or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and from your egoist consequentialism point of view, then it's basically fine, and you don't think that we can have rules, or you would want laws or rules that from behind a kind of a Rawlsian curtain that we can establish that that doesn't happen in general because while someone's not looking, that perfect, quote unquote, sounds horrible, perfect date rape could happen. And you
It sounds horrible, but theoretically, maybe, yeah, sure, yeah.
yeah, and
One
so
example of this is fuck. I wish I had this paper. I feel like I read a paper on this at one point in time that it's possible to reinterpret a prior event and make that event traumatic without even realizing that it necessarily was at the time. So, for instance, like you might have this is like really we're in really fucked up examples, but you might have like a creepy uncle that thought it
right.
was like normal for you to play with his dick until you were like 9 years old or some shit. And maybe
Mm,
growing up, maybe honestly, maybe you just didn't interpret that as being weird or whatever. But then maybe once you're
right.
like 17 or 18 and you go back and you reanalyze it, now you're like, wait a second, holy shit, that was super fucked up. And then you like
Yeah.
incur some like trauma at that point because you realize how
Yeah.
fucked up it was. But maybe at that particular point in time, this is like a hyper example or whatever. But like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
But actually, in general, that's a criticism of some cognitive behavioral therapies techniques that they might actually generate trauma through the reanalysis, like
Yeah.
kind of like you said, of past events, and that sometimes it's a yeah,
Hmm.
there's a debate about how healthy it is to keep things
Hmm.
without analyzing them, but
Yeah. This is
potentially it can be.
for sure. Yeah. One kind of question that I've had. Obviously, this is like an incredibly fucking edgy statement, But like I've kind
Yeah,
of
sure.
wondered that if we didn't have the same social stigma around sex, whether it's
Mm,
girls being slut shamed, men being virgin shamed, whatever, if we didn't have
mm,
that stigma,
mm,
would rape and like violent assault be treated more similarly? Because right now, rape is treated as one of the worst crimes you could ever fucking commit. But beating the shit out of
mm,
someone is just like, that sucks. But like both of them can involve like similar levels of like brought into an area where you don't know what's going to happen. You're physically assaulted in some way. You lose control and agency over
mm.
your own body. You're subjected to some sort of like physical trauma. But like beating the shit out of someone is just like, whatever. Like nobody thinks much about this. Like if you tell, if somebody is a story, it's like, man, I got the shit beat out of me when I was a kid. People are like, whoa, yeah, man, that sucks. But it's like, man, I got raped. It's like, oh, where like I wonder if the social stigma around it can cause the event itself to become more traumatic. I've always wondered that, you know.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, I think there's probably some intrinsic social uh, sort of heightened affection that's placed around anything to do with sex or intimacy like that,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't necessarily present in just raw violence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think it's right. There could be social stigmas, and indeed, we see that the trauma that someone faces, from a rape, depending on their sexual experience or cultural upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think there's probably quite a lot to say about that.
No.
You might be right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Uh, yeah, but
For a more safe answer, for a more safe thing to
sure,
investigate,
sure, 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 sure. Yeah.
that is in a similar vein. I wonder if
Uh-huh.
sex work would be so traumatizing or a negative experience to so many women if they weren't socially stigmatized as much because it's sex work, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite an interesting thought, I think. Um, yeah. Okay, but yeah, back to this original topic. And because this is that what we just discussed is almost touching on something else I wanted to discuss with you, which was the idea of kind of group minds. Um, have you heard of this idea?
I haven't, but
Uh,
this might be the thing that I was thinking about that really led me to wonder about everything.
oh, okay. So, I'll just like pose some examples. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, uh, well, I mean, I think where this all began is looking at ant colonies and their behaviors. So
Mm-hmm.
the mind of an ant is extremely simple, and ants are just fucking dumb.
Yeah.
But the colony of ants, a
Mm-hmm.
so-called superorganism, can have some intelligent behavior that sort of surpasses and is on a different
Oh,
level
yeah.
of each individual ant.
Mm-hmm.
So the same can be said is also true for humans.
Yeah, this was the thing actually that led me to these uncomfortable questions. My thought was no individual part of my brain I don't think is aware that it is part of a larger conscious entity, right? I don't think that my amygdala knows that like, oh, there's a conscious experience happening above me and I'm contributing to that. I don't think it has that. I don't think it can ever know that. It doesn't seem to be the
No,
case.
I think that's for sure wrong. I mean, look at split brain patient studies.
Split brain patient studies still involve a lot of different parts of the brain, not one section of the brain knowing that. And I mean, I could cut this off arbitrarily into as small a section as I want, right? I could say like I don't think a cluster of neurons recognize that they're part of a greater conscious entity, right?
Yeah, well, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose that's difficult to know. But I mean, for example, like you can take some sort of Derek Parfit kind of experiment and just take one neuron out at a time, kind of like this heaps of sand.
Mm-hmm.
What is a heap of sand? When is it? When is the consciousness lost if I take
Sure.
out one neuron out of your brain at a time?
Yeah, I think
Or
it's safe to assume that like 20 or 30 neurons don't have enough there's not enough logic there to know that it's a conscious thing. I think it's safe to assume
yeah,
that, I
I,
think.
I, I think
Uh-huh.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Um,
the only reason I say that is because I started to wonder like human colonies of people can work
mm,
similar to organisms in the way that we interact with each other, and I think it would be very
yeah.
interesting if there was a greater conscious experience that was sitting atop a country, and then I wonder if like a neuron in my brain, perhaps it's there, but I have no way of ever being cognizant of it. That exists in a way that's emergent of my civilization, and I'm just not ever.
Mm.
I can't be cognizant of it. This is kind of what I wondered.
Yeah, have you heard about the China brain
No, I haven't.
thing? Oh, okay. So the Chinese room experiment, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was by John Searle, and
Mm-hmm.
the China brain is kind of a similar idea, except well, I don't know about the fascination with China, but anyway, I think it's because there's a large number of people in China, and then also the Western philosophers didn't understand Chinese language that well.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, the idea would be that take each individual in China, um, and let them be a neuron in a brain, and they have some equation, and they have some messages they pass to other people, and you do this throughout the whole country, and you simulate a brain basically. And the question is, what is that entity? Is it is it conscious? Can it experience things like humans do, etc.? Do you have an intuition about that?
There might be a greater conscious experience, but none of the individuals themselves are capable of perceiving it. Whatever conscious experience there is some I say immaterial, but it's some substance or something that sits on top of all of that they're all contributing to. It would be an emergent property of all of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you almost said that it's immaterial, because it's necessarily material, right? Each of those people is a human doing something physical. They have obvious physical features, and it's just posing the dynamics in a stranger way. Not one made up of neurons, but made up of people, individuals writing down equations and doing formulae. So it's posed anyway by, I think, people like Ned Block, that this China brain, and like people like Dan Dennett would say, this China brain experiences everything. It's just, it can be as complicated as a human, even more complicated, or it can be as complicated as a cat, or whatever level of brain that you're simulating. Whereas the original proponents of this were saying, basically, look at this kind of example. It's impossible for it to experience things. It's they're just sort of appealing to intuition. But it seems like you think that it could be conscious, right?
Yeah, it could be, but we'd have no way. This is the problem that I have with consciousness. There's no tool that I could even imagine that I could create that would help me perceive that. I don't know of anything like that.
Yeah. I probably agree there. But could we say that, for example, I think what we could do is we could ask about, let's shift gears a little bit and look at, say, crowd behavior. So I mean, there's a lot of interesting crowd behavior happening in the United States, of course, but in some of these protests, the crowd behavior seems to take on a life of its own. Let's say there seems to be kind of a group or hive mind activity happening, which is not really controlled by any individual. Maybe it's sort of, there are some leaders, there are some important neurons, let's say, that are influencing things, on a different level than other individuals, but ultimately it seems to have a life of its own. Would you agree?
Yeah, there's a phrase I've heard. I say this, it might actually just come from a movie, but it's like a person is smart, but people are stupid. Yeah, people in groups are becoming a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Although it's interesting, because there was a paper that I saw recently which showed that if you take at least a bunch of undergrads, in research studies, there are always a bunch of undergrads, mostly white, so take the bias for what it is. But if you ask these undergrads to perform some basic cognitive tasks, like determine like the safety of some scenario or something, something that everyday people can do, if you take them while they're not drunk and you ask them to do the test, then they all perform kind of, as you'd expect. But then when they're drunk, on an individual level, the individuals perform, of course, worse than they did before. But the groups actually perform on a similar level as before. So I've wondered about this finding, about whether or not it's something like, in that setup, it's quite controlled, right? It's almost clinical. It's a safe environment. There are no sort of external threats. I wonder whether or not that environment sort of lets the leaders, or even just pieces of reason, filter through the noise, because maybe drunk people are more agreeable, etc.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
But what's interesting is, even in the sober participants, they perform better on their tasks than the individuals. So, at least in this kind of perceived safety or risk analysis kind of task. So, I think given sort of a neutral context, or even, let's say, a positive affective context, like a calm environment without threats, it is possible that groups maybe are smarter than the individuals that they contain. And I think that's almost kind of intuitive, right? Like, we almost say that it's better to be in a team. Each person can do their best thing that they're good at, and sort of specialize, rather than everyone try to do everything. So I think in sports psychology, group psychology, it's kind of a thing. Yeah, but I sort of so Sorry, just remind me, what was the problem that you were finding with group minds?
Well, I mean, the idea that there exists something that I accept the existence of that I have no way of perceiving it just kind of sucks. Because
I
then
see.
it seems it's a logical next step that you have to, you basically have to admit or concede that there could exist any number of things that you have no way of perceiving.
But you can perceive some kind of group psychology effects or group dynamics that could be indicative of some kind of, let's say, cognitive entity rather than some sort of conscious cognitive entity.
Yeah, but that could be indicative of is all inferential, and I don't have to use inferentiality, I don't think, for any other phenomenon in the known universe. I don't think we have to do that. Like, even the emergent properties of things can be observed. That I don't, or at least I'm not aware of the idea that there's an emergent property that causes something to exist that becomes unobservable, like consciousness.
Okay, but go back to the ant colony though. Mm-hmm. So I mean, we can observe the behavior of the ant colony, right, directly.
Yeah, but the question isn't behavior. The question is there experience there?
Oh, okay.
That's the different thing. Yeah. So, like for instance, I could create a circuit board, and I could make this up to many levels of complicatedness. But at what point does that circuit board begin to have an experience like mine? I can never tell you. I could never analyze it. I could guess maybe based on enough circuits interacting with each other, but I could never know, and I have no way of testing for it whatsoever.
Right, because of the problem of other minds and in general, maybe it's a different system to the biological system in that case as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So you think that? So basically, you want to deny the possibility of group minds?
Well, I want the universe to be material, and I want to be able to know everything in the universe, I guess. All right, well, for a human to be able to analyze, yeah. It's a scary world if you have to concede that there might be things that exist that are outside of your perception that also can have a great impact in the material world. It seems very weird. You're basically like a stone's throw away from gods at that point, right?
I don't think so, because I mean, you can just accept that those things exist and that you don't know that it happens to be impossible, or you don't have the current tools to analyze them and analyze their physical, like, fundamental properties. But you can at least say that, well, I can see everything else in the world is made out of physical stuff, and I know that on some level, if I break down a group of people into individuals, and I break down those individuals into their brains and their brains into their neurons, I can know that ultimately those things are physical, and I can be very sure about that. Why can't you just sort of say that I just don't know that gap between, how it actually phenomenalizes, let's say, into these kind of group dynamics or individuals?
Well, because any kind of phenomenon could exist over any type of like organized, like material things, right? I could create a rock garden, and I could say there might be something that comes out of that. There might be an emergent thing that comes out of that I just can't perceive. There might be an emergent thing that comes out of the organization of monitors on my desk that's imperceptible to me. Literally anything can become things at that point, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's I think that's fundamentally what sort of panpsychists would say.
Yeah.
And at least what I think is that ought to be true if consciousness, or if our experience is ultimately a physical thing and there is no other thing but physical stuff, then everything I've experienced ever is ultimately physical. I just don't know quite how, in what way that it is, or how to map it down to the very most fundamental basic things that are physical.
Well, yeah, but if something is emerging out of something that is literally imperceptible, there is no qualia there that we could ever have of it, then how can if I call that physical, literally everything can be physical at that point, right?
Yeah, but that's the point. That's the point of people like Galen Strawson. They call themselves so-called real physicalists. The actual physicists, like the more common physicalists, like say Daniel Dennett and so on, will take some kind of qualia and then try to explain it away and reduce it back down to these physical properties, making some assumptions along the way, and ultimately saying that those things are sort of just like fake or don't exist. Like consciousness, they sort of try to explain away consciousness or explain away qualia back down to sort of very reductionistic or even a limitivist kind of points. And
you can reduce it for sure, but like even if it's reducible to because I believe it's all reducible to chemical things. I don't think minds, or it doesn't seem to be that minds can exist independent of physical things. And altering physical things seems to alter minds, but it seems to be the case that qualia accounts for something more than physical. It must be, or I have never heard a convincing refutation of the red room experiment or the like
Mary's red room.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that says that something isn't gained when she glimpses red light for the first time? Is it possible to have that argument? Or what
Yeah. There are some. So I mean, I mean, I sit somewhere on the fence about that. Like when I hear and see a red piano,
uh-huh.
I think that I experience something which is sort of possibly an instance of that qualia, or an instance of that experience, and that instance might be different to yours. Like that's the problem of other minds.
Could be, yeah,
But also,
unfortunately, yeah.
yeah. So in that sense, the objective study of that qualia is almost destined to fail at some level, because I can't be sure that when you report to me that, oh yeah, that red piano over there is it's that classic thing of is that color red the same color red that you have in your mind?
I think I would inferentially say it is in the same way that I would inferentially say you have a mind. Like I'm pretty sure you have a mind because we have similar parts. So I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that you perceive red the same way because we have similar parts. Like I would have to assume that. That would basically be my assumption. Yeah.
But you can't be totally sure, right? And
No,
it
of
is
course
an
not. I mean, so technically, I mean, in a way, you could argue for solipsism. Like, I can't really even be sure that you have a mind.
yeah,
Right? I can't really know that.
yeah,
That's all inferential. Yeah,
yeah,
because it's
yeah,
imperceptible to me. Yeah, or imperceptible. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, yeah, it seems like the problem of other minds though is a lot harder than, let's say, like the problem of our own mind. It seems like for sure, like Descartes said it, said it, how do you say it? Igito ergo sum. I think therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems obvious that that we exist, and the problem of other minds is a lot harder. And whether or not other people experience qualia in the same way is therefore just as hard as the problem of other minds.
Sure.
And on that basis, then we can ask the question in Mary's red room, or lack of red, and she studies and becomes an expert in red. She's becoming an expert in a reductionistic or a limitivistic sort of framework on the color red. That is, she's looking at the rods and cones and the eye and the visual pathway in the brain and all of these different features, but she is never actually experiencing red herself, and that experience is something totally separate from the physical properties of that perception.
But that's like that's like begging that's like cheating your way out of the experiment, though, right? Like the question is like, is there any amount of I don't know if I can borrow Searle's language here. Maybe this is not right of me to do. But is there any amount of syntactic knowledge that I could acquire that would convey upon me some semantic understanding? It seems to be what the red room, or what the Mary's room is getting at, right? Is there some amount of yeah? But it seems to be the case is no, that like experiences themselves cannot be conveyed from person to person without using the experience. Even if we try to convey an experience to another person, we have to use other experiences and hope that they've experienced them. Like, oh my God, this cat's fur is so soft. We're like, really? Like, what does it feel like? Well, have you ever felt like a soft blanket? Like, you can't just say like you can't explain what it is. The words mean nothing, right?
So, yeah. So isn't that for my point?
That Mary, well, but that's the point of the Mary's room, is that like you can't possibly, so like the point of the room is when she sees the color red for the first time after she studied everything there is to know about it, is something new gained? And people would say, well, yeah, something new is gained. But if you say, well, that just means she hadn't studied everything about it, well, that's like the whole point of the experiment. That means that you can't know everything about it. That would be what I would think, right? You're cheating your way out of, well, of course she just didn't study everything about it. Oh, what did she need to do? See the color red? Well, that's because that's like the whole point, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, this is why it's a bit. I guess this kind of real physicalism is a bit perplexing, because it fully accepts qualia in the way that you described, and it just says that there's something else that you just can't study in that physically eliminativist or reductionist way. and therefore qualia exist, and we can't be sure that qualia are the same between people because of the problem of other minds.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, this is really
and
weird, but just because we've been talking about sex so much recently on stream with everything,
sure,
like a really good example of this is like women that haven't had orgasms until they're like 20 or 30 years old. Like a lot of times
right,
when women get it, they don't even know what an orgasm feels like, and then like they might have
yeah,
their first one at like 25, like oh shit, but they had no fucking idea up until then, just because they hadn't
yeah,
had the experience, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
you can't
yeah,
really explain like, well, what does that type of thing feel like? Like I couldn't explain an organ, or I couldn't explain like stomach pain if you haven't felt it before.
yeah,
Like even like think about the words that we use to explain stomach pain. What does stomach feel like? It feels like somebody taking knives and stabbing you. Like, well, what the fuck? I don't know what the fuck that feels like. I don't know. I don't know about you, but I've
yeah,
never been stabbed before. I don't know what the fuck a knife feels like stabbing me. Or like what does a migraine
yeah,
feel like? Somebody taking a hammer to the back of your skull. I don't know. I've never had someone do that to me before, right? But I seem to have like we're all just like using proxies for things. It seems like unless you've experienced it, you don't really know what you're talking about, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you agree that there's really just physical stuff in the universe, right?
I can't. I mean, I think my mind is part of the universe, right? And it doesn't. If it's physical, if I say that minds are physical, then I've blown up the word physical to encompass things that I would normally consider non-physical. It seems to be the
But
case.
in what sense is qualia non-physical?
Well, it's non. Well, in what sense is it physical? Physical
Well,
to
in
me
the
is
sense,
like matter. Is my conscious matter? It doesn't seem to be,
mm,
because I
well,
seem to have ways to
how-
investigate all matter. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, okay. No. Yeah. So you seem to have ways to investigate all matter,
Yeah.
but does that mean that there's phenomena that you might not be able to understand?
Understand, yeah, but not have a sense organ to perceive? No. I don't think so. Like, if I say that there exists some physical stuff that is literally immeasurable, well, what the
Mm.
fuck? It feels like at that point, like I've made physical stuff so broad and vacuous that stuff that most people would consider immaterial is now all of a sudden physical.
But you can measure it in. Well, I mean, let's say you can count it, or you can say that it exists because you've experienced it, right? For
I mean, I've
example, you
experienced my
experience.
mind. I haven't experienced other people's
Yeah.
minds or minds of dogs, and we posit that other people and
Uh,
dogs have minds, right?
right. So but
Hmm.
without falling back to the problem of other minds, we can say that at least for ourselves, we have an experience of the color red,
Yes.
and um, and if we say that at some point that color red was produced, or that my perception of it was ultimately due to physical causes and physical matter, physical stuff,
Uh huh.
then I can sort of just, at the level of sort of phenomenology or experience, I can say that yeah, that qualia is like a physical thing that I just counted, or that I can point to
I don't
and
think
say
so,
yeah, that's
though. This is like one of the big problems, for instance, in neuroscience, right? Is just because things are reducible to physical properties doesn't mean the physical thing gives you an understanding of what you've reduced, right? So like in neuroscience, maybe we can poke a brain and sometimes somebody thinks of something, a certain area of the brain lights up. But do we truly know? Maybe this is a bad analogy because we don't have finite tools enough to investigate like a brain. But like I don't know if like looking at how I don't know if looking at how a smaller thing has an interaction gives us an understanding of the emergent like qualia. I would appeal back to the circuit board example. Let's say that I put a camera on a circuit board and then I give it the ability to distinguish between wavelengths of light. Like, would I ever say that a camera has the experience of the color red? Like my Sony camera up here, right? I have an A7 III and it can do auto white balancing and detecting of colors and it can shade things differently. Is it currently having an experience of different colors?
Well, that depends how you define it, right? If you're saying that it's the experience of different colors is the same as your experience of different colors, then you've sort of washed out what experience means, and you've also
Mm-hmm.
kind of presupposed a kind of an experiencing kind of entity.
Mm-hmm.
It happens that, for example, ants do things, and in little ways, or individual cellular organisms do things,
Mm-hmm.
and we may or may not use the term experience with those different
Sure.
things that they
When I
do.
say experience, I mean like a literal some sort of conscious experience. Like it seems to us, or at least our human perception, is there is some level of meta-analysis or metacognition or something that like when I see the red, it's not strictly my eyes, perceive a wavelength that's sent off via an electrical signal to the brain, and the brain. Like I'm actually like there's some metacognition that exists on top of all of that can think about itself and can think about the things that it
Yeah,
sees. Yeah. Does my
yeah.
camera have that?
I don't think so. No.
Sure, but so
Yeah.
so that metacognition, so like the experience of the color red, that must be
Mm.
different than the reducible part that like just perceives the color red, right? Or is it that like
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. That's true. Yeah.
uh-huh.
I think that, but that doesn't mean that we can. It does. So that from that point, what you just said, there are two pathways.
Mm-hmm.
One pathway is let's eliminate the existence of these qualia altogether and deny they exist,
Mm-hmm.
and just say that it's ultimately physical. We just don't quite understand how to build up to it.
Okay.
Or we can just at this level say what you do, and you say that okay, I'm just unsure about the physical nature of things, and this might be some kind of immaterial thing that I can't quite understand. If that's a fair summary of what you think. Um,
It's possible that it could be that, but I can't. And
yeah.
maybe you can help me and give me more examples here. I can't think of a single other thing that I can have an example of that I can't even imagine trying to measure it. Like I could imagine trying to measure black holes, which seem to be extraordinary things. I mean, I can't even see those, but I could think of ways to measure them. I can't think of a single way ever to measure a conscious existence. I can't think of anything. I can't think of a
Yeah,
test I could run or anything like that.
yeah, I agree. And so the third sort of option that sort of that the so-called real physicalists suppose is they sort of treat qualia
Mm-hmm.
as physical units or like sort of they obviously come from something more fundamental,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't have a way to sort of to perceive or test for the connection between this higher level and this
Mm-hmm.
lower level.
Sure.
Um, yeah.
So then,
So
but then it seems like if you agree with that, do you agree then
mm,
that you must immediately make a concession that these like unseen connections could exist in any other way all throughout nature?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Then I
Yeah,
guess I would agree with that. Sure.
yeah. So I mean, then it sort of becomes a panpsychist position, right?
I don't know what
Ish.
panpsychism is, but I know I've had like 7
It,
different people email me and say, "Hey, you're a
yeah.
panpsychist." So yeah, sure.
Meaning something like that anything theoretically, if built up to enough stuff, could have a conscious experience given the right topology and features and all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you think that's true?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But also, I guess the
Wait, repeat
panpsychist.
that again. I'm sorry. Fuck, I was typing into that Discord chat. Say
It's
that again, so
okay.
I didn't just agree to something. Go ahead.
So, for example, like if I'll make it a little bit more specific.
Oh no,
So,
just repeat the same general thing you said. I'll understand. I'm sorry. I was typing in the
okay.
trains Discord chat, so I'm getting in trouble. Go ahead.
Okay. Um, how did I phrase it? Something like, yeah, so you think that basically if you assemble the right stuff in the right place in the right way, you can create a conscious experience, a conscious experiencing entity or a cognitive entity or something.
It would seem like I should assume that that's the case. Yeah, I can't
Okay.
know that, but that seems to be the. I can assemble other human minds, like by
Mm.
fucking somebody and creating a kid, and then that's like it's assembling shit.
Yeah,
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 I
that's
mean I've done that
good
once,
point.
so yeah. So I would imagine that if I put together some level, there's some threshold of sophistication that a computer could reach, such that it emulates the parts of the human mind, such that some conscious experience should appear there.
Mm.
That seems to be the
Mm.
case. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you just, reduce that down, let's say you have that computer simulation or emulation of the brain, you could reduce that down to like a chimpanzee and then to like a dog and then to like an ant,
Mm-hmm.
theoretically, right?
Theoretically, yeah.
Yeah. And then all the way down to a single cellular organism, you know.
Sure.
Um, and it just so happens that we use the example of a computer there, but theoretically with the right tools you could do the same in biology, like with cells and actual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So then at that point, then when you get down to the like the individual cell, um, at some level, at least in combination with other stuff around it, it has some unit of mental kind of stuff, mental properties, actually. Right?
What do you mean by mental? Oh, do we mean quality
Well,
or experienced, or what?
no, I sort of mean assume there's just one type of stuff in the universe, and that's physical.
Okay.
And the physical stuff has two types of properties. One property is physical that you can measure, like heat and whatever. Another property is like how they relate to mental phenomena or mental states. And
7.
obviously, if you assemble all these things, these physical things, in the right way, their mental properties, combine in such a way that it creates mental states. And you agree with that, basically?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, going up, we can create mental states, and then going down, we can reduce the size of these mental states, or the maybe competencies or complexities of these mental states. And then at some point, we get to something which is somewhere. Maybe it's not even a discrete point. It might be a continuum, where there's no mental states, or sort of there are just mental properties.
Possibly, yeah. So like you wanted to bring up that split brain thing earlier. There might be a continuum of my maximally conscious experience. There might be smaller conscious experiences that sit underneath that I just can't perceive. Yeah, possibly. Sure. So yeah.
And I think we can actually test it or there's evidence at least for that in the split brain patient studies. I mean, they cut the sort of connection between the neocortex, which of course still leaves like the midbrain section and the pons and the body and the environment. If you think about all those interactions, for the cortex to still cooperate and interact, but still we see sort of crazy kind of quizzical behaviors in those people, because they appear to have a separation of consciousness, right?
Yeah, where you can cover one eye and ask somebody to draw something and they won't be aware of it, but the other hand is capable of drawing it, which seems very
yeah. So in those cases, then we can say that there might be subcomponents of individual, what we perceive as normally individual conscious minds, which can be conscious independently. And I think we've also established that we can have mental states or conscious entities or cognitive entities which are lower than humans in sort of their abilities, and therefore probably smaller in terms of the amount of physical stuff that consists of them or makes them exist.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think ultimately what I've tried to just describe is something like panpsychism, but ultimately physical. And I think it's important that for me anyway, I think it's important that we don't treat mental events or qualia and things like this as this kind of weird pseudo-physical, not quite sure, could be immaterial stuff, because to me they're just as real as 1 + 1 = 2 or something like that. They have exactly the same truth status, and at least to me personally. And if we eliminate it and make it sort of reduce it down to something which is sort of eliminating the qualia and just saying it's all just physical interactions at a molecular scale or something, then it loses its special status in my mind and my psychology. And it also has implications for ethics, which I don't like, because then you can say my brain made me do it, or the physical chemical reactions made me do it, that kind of stuff. But
you can get weird there and say, okay, well, we're not punishing you, we're punishing the body that carries the chemical reactions, I guess, if you wanted to be really cute about it. But sure.
Yeah, you can. In general, though, I don't like it because it's very removed from sort of folk psychology or folk experience. Everyday experience of people is they're not going to relate to that. We need something to empathize with, that they can attribute justice principles to, and things like these. So I want qualia to be real. I want mental states to be just as real as 1 + 1 = 2. And I want it also to be physical, because I want physical stuff to be because if we have immaterial stuff or non-physical stuff, then I think we have, well, I mean, it would be quite exciting if there was, but I think it becomes a much more complicated and unevidenced and almost kind of pseudo-scientific pursuit, because unless we know the scientific, on some sort of scientific grounds, that there is this immaterial stuff that we can interact with in repeatable ways, then theoretically you just open up the can of worms to, I think, what you were kind of implying, like gods and religion and all this stuff that no one could ever prove. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, sorry for the spiel.
Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
but okay, but yeah, so maybe yeah, to add another one of those little labels for yourself. I don't know if you like them anymore, but um, maybe you're a so-called real physicalist, or panpsychist, really. And yeah, just to circle back, so group minds then are not a problem anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could exist. I don't, yeah. I just have no way of knowing
Yeah.
about them, yeah.
Yeah, and that they're probably physical, right? Or that we don't have any reason to think they're non-physical.
Sure, yeah. Have
Ah,
you,
okay.
did you ever read Ender's Game?
No.
No. There's
What's it
a
like?
weird part in the end of the book where we're kind of like fighting some alien hive mind. We as in humans are fighting an alien hive mind, and the alien hive mind expresses regret towards the end of the book. It didn't realize that killing humans was like really bad because it exists as a collective entity. So losing like
Uh-huh.
small parts of itself, like it's not being damaged, like much the same
Yeah.
way that we might shed hair or nails, like a few bugs might die, but like you're not killing it. So it viewed humans the same way, and it didn't realize that each individual human was like this sentient entity. That it's
Huh.
just kind of an interesting concept. It kind of relates to this a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it does a bit. I mean, I would quickly draw analogies to like, the fury or the fever of the crowd being sort of taking people's, conscious thought out of on an individual level, just out of the picture entirely, and they're sort of
Mm-hmm.
just getting caught up in the emotions of some group psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So I think there are some analogies which actually are quite timely at the moment, unfortunately.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, but
Okay.
uh, but ultimately they're physical is the point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you agree?
I mean, it seems to be the case. Yeah, everything
Okay,
seems to
cool.
stem. Yeah, because whatever immaterial thing I think exists, from everything that any immaterial thing I know, like conscious minds, all seems to tie back to some physical underlying thing, and all of those things are like inexorably tied to those underlying physical things, such that if those underlying physical things are altered, it alters the immaterial thing, and if it's destroyed, it destroys the immaterial thing, or it seems to. Yeah.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Just one final thing.
Mm-hmm.
Was last time we talked about friendship, and I'm not sure how much you remember, but you sort of said that your friendships were transactional or instrumental, and by my definition weren't sort of true friendships. That is, friendships that intrinsically value the other person. Do you still have that view?
Yeah, I think so, but I think that I think that a lot of the language gets moralized. But yeah, I think I have the same view. Yeah.
Because uh, one one counter argument that I've made actually with the philosopher that proposed some of the key arguments around this debate about true friendship
Mm-hmm.
was that you can think of the friendship as a person or as kind of a pair person or a pair mind,
Mm-hmm.
Um, Socrates, I think, famously said something like, friendship is the soul that exists between two people. So, on this level, and given this discussion we've just had, for me anyway, I see some solution in treating friendships almost as an entity unto
As separate
themselves.
entities. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, at least on a folk kind of philosophy or folk psychology level, we sort of do this. Like when you're having an argument with your girlfriend or significant other, and they say, "Oh, no, I'm just going to leave you, and I'm going to go to this place now," and you're like, "Oh, but what about us? Us, as in kind of some entity that isn't just the individuals."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for me, anyway, this resolves some of the problems of thinking about true friendships because from a consequentialist point of view, or even an egoist point of view, well, actually, maybe not from an egoist view, but from a consequentialist point of view, where you value the sort of persons and their preferences or their experiences,
Mm-hmm.
uh, then you can treat these group minds and say the group mind or the pair mind between two people as an entity unto itself and treat its preferences with respect, and then let your true friendship basically be operated by the respect you give to this sort of friendship person, or I can't remember how I phrased it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an
Hey, but
interesting way of looking at it. Yeah.
I think, oh, that's right. I called it relational persons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, if you think that that friendships are transactional or instrumental or something like this. But what would be your consideration of so-called relational persons as I just described?
Yeah, it'd probably be a healthy way to view a relationship because it would ultimately benefit yourself in that transactional relationship. I guess. I mean, kind of,
I
it reminds
see
me of
it.
the old advice where it's like if you're in a relationship with somebody, you attack the problems, not the person. You both
Yeah.
have a problem that you need to solve rather than one of you has a problem the other person needs to solve or something. Yeah. I think it's a good way of
Yeah.
framing disagreements.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think so. Yeah, too often those kind of disagreements can become, as you say, sort of attacking the other
Mhm.
person themselves rather
Yeah.
than some external problem. Very nice. Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't have anything else in particular that I wanted to chat with you.
Okay. Well, hey, listen, I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah,
I'm gonna run and chat with Train now. So,
of course. Yeah.
all
All
right.
right. Well,
Cool.
best wishes.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate the conversation, bud.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye. iDubbbz's content cops are way more involved than Leafy's shit ass, like, here's 3 random clips, isn't